I had the wrong number. Yeah. Community service host, Janet Senton Hall. Whoever that is. Okay. You.
Good evening, everyone. It's April 1st, and it's no joke. It's 2021 at 6 p.m. This is the North Santiam Sewer Authority. It's held by Zoom conference due to COVID-19. Welcome, everyone. Roll call. Janet.
Mr. Woodward.
Yes, I'm here.
You are. Cool. I'm Joel Parks.
Here.
Mr. Weesey.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Miss Shelley.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, give her a second.
We're on roll call, Shelley.
Are you there, Shelley?
I'm here.
It does not look like we have Mr. Kirsch yet and Mr. Yui. Is that correct? The two I'm missing.
That's it.
Perfect.
So we are in a quorum.
We do have a quorum. Jeff Yohe's the other one that's not here, right?
Yes, I did.
Absent.
They get all the assignments.
Okay. Is there any declarations of conflict of interest? With this, I do not hear anything. Announcements. Janet.
Can I give a real quick announcement?
Okay.
So it's not on the calendar. That was on the document, but April 6th, we are having the technical review committee, the next one. That's the number 4 technical review from 1:30 to 3. It's not necessarily a public meeting for comments or anything like that, but it is being held via Zoom. So if anybody does want to join, they're welcome to.
What time?
It's from 1:30 to 3.
Woo.
Danielle, can you repeat that? It's April 6th.
April 6th. Thank
Okay.
you.
If you will send that document to me so I can make it public, notify. Yeah,
Yep, will do. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
thank you.
And no other specific announcements on my side.
Only announcement I'd like to make, if you're not a member of the board and this is your first time attending, if you could please put your information in the chat. You can either send it directly to me or in the main so we can record your information for the meeting records. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment and questions? We're going to limit them to 3 minutes. Is there any public comments or questions? I guess not. Hello, McCrae.
And maybe
Ashton.
we need to introduce McCrae because she's not on the agenda.
McCray, you want to introduce yourself? McCray Carmichael of Willamette Valley Council of Governments.
McCray Carmichael, Mid Willamette Valley Council of Governments. I do land use planning for the city of Detroit and the city of Gates, and in this capacity, help manage the contract for Keller Associates for the facilities plan that we're working on.
And Gordon Wilson, you just want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm happy to. I'm Gordon Wilson. I'm with FCS Group, and I'll be presenting the valuation of the Mill City wastewater system tonight.
And is it Dallin Stevens?
Yeah, that's correct. Dallin Stevens with Keller Associates. I'm helping Peter out with the technical evaluation of the alternatives we're considering.
And who's next? That's Peter. You just want to introduce yourself?
And you don't want to hear from me. You're going to hear enough from me later.
Okay.
No, I happy to be here with Keller Associates, the project manager for the master planning.
And just for the record, Heath Coakley.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. Heath Coke, Oregon Association of Water Utilities.
And he's got green trees behind him. That's not that's not our area. Okay.
I was up in your area today. And will be tomorrow. So.
Oh, okay. Approval of a meeting summary notes from March 4th, 2021. Did everybody get to review them? They all look okay? Anybody want to make a motion? Shelley,
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of the March NSSA meeting.
I'll second it.
and who is that?
Jeff Smith.
Jeff Smith. Shelley Engel made a motion to approve the summary notes for March 4th, 2021. Jeff Smith seconded it. Any discussion? Doesn't seem like it. Janet? Unmute.
No. Ken,
Yay.
Shelley,
Yay.
I'm not the only one tonight. Joel,
Yay.
Jeff Smith,
Yay.
Dale Weesey,
Aye.
and me, I. The only two are the missing.
Okay. The meeting summary notes has been approved unanimously. Treasurer, financial report. Joel.
So nothing new. We still have the same balance of $786.95 with a credit with Spear Hoyt, $2,348.50.
2,300 and what?
348 and 50 cents.
Joel, just so you're aware, we have had communication with the attorney. Obviously, I've been CCing you on that, so we will get a bill for that coming soon.
Okay.
Hopefully that'll offset our credit with them.
Hopefully. Bill coming soon.
So nothing for action on that one.
There we go. Did everybody get to review the board rules? I don't know how that mission statement got in there because we already discussed that last time, but it's in there. Board rules, and what was the other one, Danielle? The bylaw, or
Yeah,
we
it's
need
the
that?
policies and procedures, and this may actually fit probably better under new old business at the very end. So I want to make sure we're taking advantage of, Peter and Keller's time today.
Okay, I agree. Let's move that down. Well, old business. Discussion. Engineering design of wastewater master plan update. Peter, the floor is yours.
Janet, can you let Tim know? Because he really needs to know the information on the Mill City side.
Yes, and he just told me he's just getting home and getting ready to log on now.
Perfect.
That's what I was leaning over for.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
So you can.
Uh-oh. I'm trying to share my screen, make that work.
Oh, you probably need my permission. Hold on just a moment, please.
Oh, no, I think it's going to work. It's going to let me. I was just, it's a PowerPoint, so I was kind of trying to figure out which I want to.
He's just giving Tim time to get on.
That's perfect.
There you go. I think I'm sharing the right one. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
So while we're waiting for Tim, who here has noticed that the traffic is back?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Is your bank account 0057?
Yes. Yeah, all the traffic. Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
I did not miss it. Okay, sorry, Peter.
No problem. I didn't know if he was asking me. That was my bank account. I'm like,
Yeah, that's what I see, Peter. That's what I see.
Oh, I was like, I hope I didn't have some up there.
Right.
All right, so we are seeing the presentation. So if I hit the present button, it gets all kind of wonky, and I would like to have the tabs over there. So I'll minimize those a little bit more. Is that big enough on your screens, or do I need to zoom in more?
I need to move this.
All right.
So at the top of anybody's screen, if you can't see it, you have view options and it says zoom ratio. You can do fit to window, or you can make it larger if you need.
All right. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to what we're sharing today. So this is kind of a dual part presentation that we're going to be going over today. Much of it is the engineering technical. We have a number of different scenarios. Previous meetings we've talked about life cycle analysis. Well, here we're showing you these preliminary results, what we've got, and showing you what it's looking like. And so I'll go through all that. I can answer some questions. We got a list of questions from the board a few weeks ago, and I'm hoping most of the presentation will answer most of the questions, but some it won't, and that's okay. But when we'll circle back at the end and make sure that we've answered those questions, so we're not ignoring those. And then the second part is Mr. Gordon Wilson with FCS Group talking about the Mill City system valuation. And so it's equally important as we move forward, obviously. So in the interest of time, I will move fairly quickly, but feel free to yell at me and stop me. But if I'm not hearing questions and things like that, I'll try and keep pace so that we can make sure we get through all the material. So with that, I'll jump right in unless there's any questions right off the bat. All right. Hearing none, or you can't find the mute button, one or the other. So a couple quick definitions and what before we get into some of the other technical things, I wanted to discuss what is STEP, what does it mean? It's a septic tank effluent pumping. And then I don't even like saying STEG, the septic tank effluent gravity. And it's important to understand the difference between these two, because Mill City really is the septic tank effluent gravity. You have a bunch of very small gravity pipes collecting the flow that comes from those septic tanks, and it flows by gravity into those smaller lines. So the solids are all retained in the septic tank, and they get pumped out periodically for those Mill City residents that are familiar with that. But the STEP, when we say STEP, that's septic tank effluent pumping, when we look at, we're talking more step. So the new systems, we're not talking about a steg. We're not talking about septic tank effluent gravity. We're talking about doing a septic tank effluent pumping. So I just wanted to differentiate that. When we talk about gravity pipes, lift stations, and force mains, this is a quick graphic just to show. And can you see my cursor at all?
Yes.
All right, so we have the gravity lines. They're controlled by gravity. It's got to go downhill. And so those go downhill to a wet well at a pump station. So these two lines come in to the wet well, and then it's pumped, and then it's, sorry, the other gravity main was down here. Then it's pumped out uphill. The only way the sewer flow is going to go uphill is by getting pumped. It's those types of basic concepts. So when we talk about a gravity system, we're talking about those gravity mains that flow downhill, and then they go to a wet well and get pumped where they need to be. If we talk about grinder pumps are a form of a small, similar to step. It's a pump system, but instead of retaining the solids, the liquid, everything is pumped out. And typically those get pumped out of it's a small system here. You can see the footprint size. It gets pumped up the hill to a gravity main. So that's another concept when you're working with gravity collection systems. Not everybody can flow out of their property by gravity. Some of them are just down by the river at the very bottom, and I'm sorry, you're not going to get that, by gravity out of there. So you got to have some kind of pump system to get it up the hill. And so every good gravity system has a couple of those. And then talking about treatment. So this is the existing Mill City water pollution control facility. So the wastewater treatment plant there. It's a recirculating gravel bed filter. What it has is some screening up front. And this comes from the pump stations. And because Mill City system is a steg, it has gravity lines that all go to system lift stations that pump it over to the treatment plant. So it comes from the pump station, it gets screened, goes into a recirculating tank, a big tank, and that gets pumped, metered into the gravel bed filter system, and that flow is recirculated. And that's what the treatment process is. It's very basic, very simple. And then when it's done, it sends a certain amount of flow out to the drain fields on a constant rate. So you're recirculating more than you're sending out to the drain fields. That's what the existing Mill City system is. It's not high tech. It doesn't provide a high level of treatment, and this would not work to send it out to the river. You need a higher level of treatment to send it out to the river. Mechanical treatment plant. This is the higher level of treatment. You have your screening up front. When it comes in from the system, you have grit removal, and then it goes to a biological treatment process where you starve it of air, you give it air, you mix it, maybe add chemicals, and then it has the solids can recirculate as well. And then those solids, they get hauled to a landfill. If you're a big enough plant, you have more processing, dewatering, things like that. But for the size of these plants, it's going to be hauled to a landfill. And then you go get membrane tanks where it's filtered. And if you are doing infiltration basins, more than likely that would be the end of the process, and you would discharge to the infiltration basins that we talked about with GSI previously. If we need to discharge to the river, it needs further treatment. It needs tertiary treatment, which would typically be sand filters, UV disinfection, and then discharge to the river. So it's a higher level, again, higher level treatment to go to the infiltration basins, and then again another higher level of treatment to get to the to discharge to the river. Wanted to differentiate the difference between an infiltration basin and a drain field. Drain field is what every individual home has. They have that drain field that's subsurface. You can see the pipes over here in a gravel bed. The water gets metered out of there as it leaves the septic tank and infiltrates into the ground. With a infiltration basin, concept isn't much different. They're just open. You can see these 3 basins back here. Those are infiltration basins that you discharge the water to there and let it infiltrate into the ground. Nothing more to say there. Last one before we dig in a little bit to the collection systems is the step versus gravity. There's a lot of debate, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty details here about step versus gravity. There's a lot of arguments both ways. This just highlights some of the differences. This figure here was from a very old document. I'm just going to say that. It's from the 90s, from an EPA document. I wasn't quite happy with it, so I added all these other considerations that you need to think about when you're looking at a step versus a gravity system, a collection system. And so, some of the concepts here is doing a gravity, it has to go downhill. I've already mentioned that. Your construction costs are going to be higher. You're going to be deeper. And I liked what this did say though, rocky, high groundwater. Sound familiar? In the North Santiam Canyon? Rocky, high groundwater, if not boulders the size of a truck or something. And so you're going to be dealing with that, and that'll increase the construction costs. Whereas with a step system, you can stay right, 4 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet below the ground level and just cruise right along. You don't have to go down to that 10, 15 feet deep. That's a benefit that gets you a lot lower construction costs. Operation and maintenance, you're going to have a little higher operation and maintenance with the pumps. You will have to replace them, and whether you replace them in 5, 10, 15, at some point, they need to be replaced and maintained. And that, when you have, a couple thousand of them in the system, that presents a higher cost. The gravity systems have their own maintenance as well. You have to clean, you have to CCTV, inspect, and take care of your system. And power costs, you do have, this says none, but that asterisk, it says there's local pump stations that you do have power costs. But then you don't have a power cost for every single step system in the system. Other considerations, like I said, I don't need to read all these off because that's not the focus of the information that I'm presenting, but you have access. It's different. For each system has a different way of accessing and cleaning and maintaining. The power costs are different. Easements, if you're doing the step system, you have to have an easement for that line to the and including the tank. If the system backs up with your step systems, you have the potential at every single location for a backup if there's a problem. Whereas with a gravity system, it's at your local or regional lift station. So there's other things to consider there about emergency maintenance requirements, and it's not day one, right? It's 10 years, 15 years. It's down the road when there starts to be failures and problems. Your trench depth is much less with the step system. Infiltration and inflow is a big deal with the gravity systems. That can be a big factor when you look 10, 15, 20 years down the road at your system and how much excess water from the groundwater and from your rain gets into the system. And you have to handle that, and you have to treat it when it gets into your system. So that's a whole lot, kind of a smattering. I threw it at the wall. Take it for what it's worth, and that just kind of whets your palate, gets you ready for the rest of the discussion. Any questions real quick before we kind of move forward with looking at the collection systems and the scenarios?
I was just wondering about tanks, the size of tanks that would be compatible with either system. That's a big question that's coming up. So you can answer that later and just move forward, but just keep that in the back of your head.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific tank size. Dallin, is there an average size that you would say is,
It's all based on bedrooms, I know, but.
Yeah, and that's where the way we've looked at the scenarios is utilizing existing tanks,
right,
and then pumping out of those tanks, which then you can have a much smaller, system connected to that. So, or the pumps right in the tank.
Okay.
So. All right. moving on. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the collection system layouts. It's just letting you know we've thought through it. We've got out the CAD, drawing software with all the surface elevations, and we've looked at gotten pretty detailed in how we've laid this out. This is for gravity system. This is not for a step system. For a step system, it's just easier. You just put it out in front of every place and you just run the pipes right along there. It becomes a much more simple layout in concept when you look at that.
Peter,
Yep.
we need to put in
Yes.
there is that we had 2 different pathways, and that's the reason why it looks like there's multiple different scenarios where you would not normally have that in a master plan. We've got multiple different scenarios that we're trying to look at.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out. That's the reason.
Fair enough.
Okay, so to clarify, this is if it were a gravity system only, which I've learned a lot in the last week. So this is a gravity system for the Detroit to Idana system.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Correct.
you.
Yeah, and we'll zoom in a little
Thank
bit
you.
here.
Oh, that's
I
so much
know.
better. Thank you.
I figured you weren't going to be able to see that unless we zoomed in a little bit more.
Thank you.
The red are locations where we are assuming that's going to be a grinder pump. As I mentioned earlier, those are locations that you're not going to gravity out of there. And so we have local lift stations for this area that's gravitating to that lift station. It pumps it across the river. Lift station here pumps it up to the highway, and then it's all gravity down to a central location. These green and pink lines, whatever you want to call it. One is the green if it was pumped from Detroit to Idana, and the pink is if it's pumped from Idana to Detroit. We're just showing the two, like Danielle's saying, 2 different options of what we're looking at, option A and option B. I'll give you more information on what option A and B mean as we advance here.
Even if you did gravity in Detroit, you're still going to have a large enough tank and then pump it up into Idana, correct?
Correct. And when you say tank, it's a wet well, right? Yeah, it's another word for the tank. We're getting fancy.
A 55-gallon drum, you put it in the ground, you let it get in there, and then you pump it up.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know.
Yeah, I know. So this is the pink and green lines of those force mains, either coming from Idana to Detroit to get pumped on down the canyon, or the green line is if it's getting pumped from Detroit over to Idana to be handled in a treatment process there. So this is the layout here. Again, one location where, street, I should say, not location, looking at grinder pumps. Detroit's tricky, Ken.
Oh yeah.
Very, very tricky. There's lots of little, hills and gullies and all sorts of stuff. So we spent a good amount of time trying to lay this out.
That's Howie Street, I think, that you're got the red line on.
Yeah, I'm not that section of town was difficult. Let's just say that. So the streets all should have been coming down to a street here, and then it would have been perfect, But so that's Detroit. Gates. More pump stations than I would have wanted to see, and longer force mains, but that's, again, we spent a good amount of time picking these apart. Gates is a lot more flat, but it doesn't mean that it makes it easier. Those flats go the wrong way, or relatively flat. They are sloped. And then this pump station sends it out to Mill City. And this blue one is the option A coming all the way from Detroit.
Peter, that'd be expensive.
It's only 15 miles, I think, down. Is that what we came down to?
17, yeah.
17, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Peter, was that last one for gravity in Gates?
Yeah, they're all these are gravity. All the collection system layouts are if it's gravity. If it is step, we do away with these yellow force mains, and you just have one pipe that's going to be out in front of each home.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And we did need some grinder pump situation over here up Gates Hill Road. All right, Mill City, this is really informational. This is the existing system. We're not rebuilding that. So this over here represents force main. I'll change the color before it gets finalized, but it's force main coming from Gates to the existing treatment plant location or area. All right, moving on. Those are, like I said, a lot of thought and picking apart and detail went into those, but and those are not final design. I will remind you, these are very preliminary concept layouts, and then when we get further along in the process, those details come out of exact locations in the roadways or right of ways and what that looks like. So moving on, I got to zoom back out now. All right. Yes, sir.
No, I'll ask later.
Okay. This is a high-level summary of what the options mean. Option A is if there's no river discharge, it has to go to groundwater infiltration, and that would mean or require at this point requires a pipeline from Detroit to Gates. All the treatment would be in Mill City, and this represents the highest cost. To me, it's obvious reasons. It's because we've been looking at it a lot, but that pipeline from Detroit to Gates is a major factor, obviously. Option B is if you're allowed to do direct discharge to the river, and that would mean adjustments to the 3 basin rule and changes.
And that would be river discharge, only cleaned water.
Yes, higher levels of treatment. It's the mechanical treatment that we were going over at the beginning of the presentation there. This
would be no raw effluent and or no class A effluent. It's even higher than class A.
Well, we're not going to use class A from what.
No, I'm just trying to get it clarified to everybody that's listening.
I know. Heath knows what I'm talking about. I got my wrist slapped by the DEQ by saying class A or that we mentioned class A.
I know,
so,
I remember.
I know.
But clean water.
Yes. That option B, because of the need to change the 3 basin rule, it would take longer. That's not a quick process. I don't want to, make anyone think that. Danielle's going to understand that process a lot better than me. And that's not the focus of our discussion now, but that's what would be needed. This is kind of the middle range of the costs when you look at these options. The one in between that's kind of come up, it's always interesting to go through these processes of analysis and stuff. We had option A and B, and then we go, man, we got to have an hybrid. This doesn't, it can't just be A and B because this doesn't work. And so we designated this hybrid A, B, and the reason is because it goes Gates, Mill City instead of river discharge to go do infiltration, and because that would work with the current 3 basin rule, and whether that's infiltration through a rapid infiltration basin, the picture I was showing you earlier, or expanding the drain field and getting much more drain field than the current water pollution control facility. That would mean Detroit Idana would be doing a direct river discharge or targeting that and going that direction. And it would obviously be a phased process because that would take much longer to get that direct river discharge than the infiltration basin, which is permittable with the current rules. This provided a lower cost. You're avoiding that pipeline in between Detroit and Gates. It's a significant cost increase. So that's the overall. I want to dive in to show you pictorially kind of what these mean, because if we went deeper than just A, B, and hybrid, we also looked at what does it look like to have step, gravity, step for Mill City, gravity for everyone else, different variations. And so that was the whole purpose, is doing these life cycle analyses. I'm going to go through, there's 6 of them that we're going to go through. The hybrid, we didn't pick apart different slides for each one of those, but we have a summary at the end that shows all these and costs and what that means. So option A, it looks like I got to zoom out just a tad bit. So option A1, we are doing, we are not discharging to the river. It's option A. Mill City stays the same, and that's what Mill City does in every option. Gates, Detroit, and Idana are step systems. Yes.
I'll say one thing. So while the Mill City option becomes a same, that doesn't mean though there wouldn't be modifications to what they have as operations to accommodate the other pieces. Am I correct in saying that?
Depending on what the treatment and disposal is, yes. Yeah, but they would remain with septic, steg systems that need to be pumped out and so on. Dallin and I did look at potentially just ripping everything out and starting from scratch. And I think everyone would run me out with a pitchfork. So we left that one alone. and it just, we did look at it, and actually the cost was so high that it's not something that we're gonna, carry forward in any analysis or comparisons. So Gates, Detroit, Idana's are all step systems. They're all pumped, and then pumped and pumped and pumped, and then pumped again, all the way from Detroit to Gates and to Mill City, which then uses the existing, what I'm gonna say RGB, that's the recirculating gravel bed system, that filter plant, and then, but split to a new mechanical treatment plant, which would dispose to the infiltration basins. And so this makes use of the existing plant. You do gain a lot of benefit there and cost savings, and the existing drain fields, which with some minor improvements, they will continue to be useful and live long and prosper. So that is option A1. So the difference between A1 and A2 is everything goes gravity except for Mill City. And like I said, Mill City stays, but Gates, Detroit, and Idana go to a gravity collection system instead of the step system. So that's A2. And then the only difference between A2 and A3 is we changed Gates. And that's more important when you look at the river discharge. But to be consistent, we did this analysis that made Gates either step or gravity, while keeping Detroit and Idana as a gravity or step. Option B is direct river discharge. And again, we did a similar analysis as A, right? A1, A2, and 3. B1, B2, and 3 are the same except for you have river discharge. And so B1 is all step systems, but instead of being pumped to Gates and on to Mill City, Detroit and Idana have their own mechanical plant, with high levels of treatment, and is discharged to the river. And then because it's discharged to the river, the existing RGB plant, the existing Mill City plant it's not high enough level of treatment. You need a new mechanical plant and then discharge to the river. B2, again, it's the same as A2, except for you have the river discharge in both situations. Everything's gravity. I should say everything. All the new collection systems are gravity. So pictorially, that's what it looks like. And then again, B2, B3, we just changed Gates to a step system to see what that changes here. If you're discharging to the river, it doesn't really change your treatment. You still need a higher level of treatment, even though you're pulling out the solids in the system. And that higher level of treatment will then create additional solids as it gets cleaner water. So that was a quick run through of all these options, A and B. And then as I mentioned, the hybrid. Want to look at now the summary of options. This hybrid 1 and 2 option here, they They switch it so you have the infiltration in Gates and Mill City. So you're doing a non-river discharge, which is permittable, today with the 3 basin rule, and then have the river discharge in Detroit and Indiana. And the difference between 1 and 2 is whether you have a mechanical plant or not in Mill City. With Detroit, Indiana, hybrid 1 and 2 both require a mechanical treatment plant to discharge to the river. As you can see, the numbers with the scenario A with the Detroit to Gates pipeline are significantly higher. And I will mention also these dollar amounts, what you're looking at here, they also reflect it's a 20-year life cycle. So we also looked at that 20-year growth. As you get the system day 1, everyone in the city hooked up and on the system, there's also going to be expansion over the 20 years as there's new connections and new pipelines. That's also incorporated into the total capital cost because it's net present value. Then we also look at the annual O&M. So we're estimating pump replacement, servicing, the treatment, operation, and maintenance, all that gets summarized into this annual O&M cost here, which gets reflected in what the 20-year net present value to see if that kind of changes after the capital cost. What does it look like with the 20-year operation and maintenance, including replacements? You can see with hybrid 1 and 2. I mean, hybrid 2 it's using the existing plant instead of a mechanical plant in Mill City. It's a much lower cost. You get the capital cost of 85, and even the net present value of 20 years still remains lower. The operation and maintenance doesn't change that. That is looking at remaining step. We should have steg there. I'll adjust that later, but having the step systems in Mill City and then gravity for the other 3 communities. And just to let you know how dynamic these things are, as Dallin and I were finishing preparation here this afternoon, I go, what, we didn't look at step for all of the hybrid, using all step. And when we do that, it's $4 to $5 million after you build out those costs. And that is due to the regional lift stations, the extra lift stations that would be required. So you're looking at, if you did all step, what we'll show here, we'll add that in future iterations here. It will be 80 to 81 million on the total capital cost. And then you build that out with the annual O&M as well. So I just wanted to mention that just so you have an appreciation for as it evolves. We saw an improvement, and we saw something that could be better. And so that shows the step, all step and doing the hybrid approach. That's your capital and 20-year life cycle lowest cost. Doesn't always mean that's the best thing, and that's where decisions are going to have to be made about what the best scenario is for the long-term situation of the sewer authority. When you look at growth, expansion capability, so on and so forth, people are going to be in different courts, and we don't need a decision today. That's not the purpose of what we're here for. We're here to just provide this information and summarize that for you.
So Peter, I have a question on this one too.
Yep.
So, and maybe this is something you can't answer today, so just know that up front. But with the amount of people that are building lots, right? Some of them are building fresh, it seems to me that something that is flexible, that you don't have to do a large capital construction project every time someone decides to now use their land. Maybe they had left it, unused for a while after the fires. I think that is something very unique in this scenario. And I just want to make sure that we have that flexibility to help people where they are in the building process. So I just want to keep that in the back of the mind and when we're doing these calculations as well.
Yeah, it's a well said question, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit. You have with the step systems, if it's all pressure, you have a main, you can connect onto that, and you can add another step tank. It's expandable from that standpoint. It does add another tank that needs to be pumped out and for operated, maintained, so on and so forth. And those are decisions that are going to have to be made, in the final selection of which direction the sewer authority wants to go. For a gravity system, as long as you're well planned, you can add on to those systems. It is by gravity. So if the pipe that you're connecting into is a certain elevation and you're lower, something different has to be made. Whereas the step is more flexible and adaptable in that way. And I would ask Dallin, with the summary I've given, was there anything you would add specifically? Anything need to be rephrased or adjusted?
No, I think just one thing to add, and we'll probably mention this a little bit later, but the $85 million for hybrid 2 looks like the no-brainer. And like Peter has said, there's certainly some decision making that needs to be made. Obviously, that one's cheaper because you're reusing some of the existing treatment plant, but it requires a lot of disposal area, right? The drainage fields take up a lot more space than the infiltration basins. On the order of, potentially, if everyone's coming down here from Mill City and Gates, it could be 20 or 30 acres worth of disposal area, versus a infiltration basin may only be 4 or 5 acres.
Peter, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Dale Weesey. The O&M numbers, do they fluctuate between manufacturers at all? Or is that just kind of a standard average baseline of systems that have been installed over time?
This is baseline average. I mean, yeah, every system, and I do know Bill with the Renco's on the listening in here, but every system's going to have slight variations and differences, and Renco can tell you all the great things about Renco and why they're better. Every system's going to do that, right? Everyone's going to sell you on different things, and Renco's a great system. I'm not saying they're anything negative there, but each one's going to have its differences, right? I mean, it's if you buy one pump from a manufacturer versus another one, and its lifetime, its lifespan, and what do you have to do to maintain and or not do to maintain is probably the more important thing. You don't want to touch it. So there's going to be slight differences in how it operates, but really, I would say the bigger aspect to that, Dale, is individual users. When you go from a gravity system that you flush, it goes, it flows out, and it's gone. Whereas you have a step system, or even your septic tanks right now. Your septic tanks right now, if someone flushes things they shouldn't be flushing down their system, they're responsible. They're the one kind of mucking up their own system, right? When it goes to a community system, but they still have these septic tanks, and it's the community system's responsibility to operate and maintain. If they have excess, or you guys all know, I mean, they're flushing things they shouldn't be flushing down their toilets and they're in their system, that then is this community system's responsibility. So there's a lot of implications there when and there's a lot of education, right, that goes into that as well. So
and one last quick question. Do you have any idea of, on the gravity side, what would be approximately the deepest depth you would have to excavate for gravity?
Yeah, we definitely kept it below 15 or shallower than 15 feet, because I felt like we would go deeper than that typically for gravity systems. But for this area, 15 feet makes me uncomfortable even. And I challenged them to keep it even less than that, but that also required an extra lift station. And so knowing the shallow rock and the canyon communities, we tried to keep it as shallow as we could.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I got a couple of quick questions for you, Peter.
Yes, sir.
All of the scenarios, A, B, and hybrids, are those all 20-year systems, or one of them going to be longer lasting than the other?
That's a good question. We looked at it for the 20-year as what we would need there. If you look at it for a 30, 40-year, I mean, most pumps, they're not going to make it that long. And so you have the treatment plants, the mechanical treatment plants. When you look at those, we don't recommend people do loans for more than 30 years on a treatment plant project, because generally, yeah, you have the concrete that's going to last, much, much longer than 30 years. But on average, you look at like a 30-year lifespan for step systems. If we're doing concrete tanks or even, the plastic tanks, they're going to last quite a bit long. It's the moving parts, it's those things.
Sure.
But 20 years just gives us something to look at. And we did look at the 30 and 40 year. It didn't change the relativity as far when we extended that further out. And then plus, it gets more complicated. You have to start looking at other types of replacements and making sure you're accounting for all those costs in there.
Well, I know with Mill City's system, it was supposed to be a 25-year system, and we were replacing pumps at 12 years and rebuilding lift stations at 15, right? So there was a lot of that, and we're 28 years now. We're looking at doing some upgrades right now that if this takes too long, we're going to end up putting some money into it right now anyway. So we're looking real closely at what you're coming up with right now to help guide us in what we do in the very near future. If this is going to take any time at all, we're going to have to do something immediately. But my next question was on discharging into the river. One of the things that we're seeing right now is with the Corps of Engineers and Fish and Wildlife is they're looking to do some improvements to the reservoir for temperature control. So temperature pollution is a big deal right now. Is that discharge into the river going to cause temperature problems?
It's on our radar. That is a very common issue. It's becoming more and more prominent. We've worked with other communities to deal with the temperature that is discharged with the effluent, and so there's different ways to combat that. I'll say that. So it will be. I'm sure that it will be an item that the DEQ will be looking at in the permitting process.
I can guarantee that it's going to. Some people are going to stand up and take notice and say something about it.
Just cool it down before you dump it into the river.
Well, yeah, it's
throw some ice in it. Maybe
it's complicated. I mean, you try and do the right thing, but you get some chillers out there, and all of a sudden your carbon footprint just doubled, tripled, or whatever you want to call. It takes it's energy hogs, and you look at wetlands. Well, then your footprint, literal footprint, just expanded dramatically, and so. There's other things like Ashland has done temperature trading where they go plant on the river and they go, they do a net benefit to the watershed. And that might likely be what you would look at here if there's an issue there. But you have to look at what the regional or the reasonable, what's that called, Dallin? Reasonable potential, and what the issue might be there before you know exactly what you have to deal with.
Hey, Peter, I got a couple of questions.
Yep.
Running the pipe from Detroit to Gates, would that be on the south side of the lake or would that be on 22? We probably already know the answer, but.
It'd be on the north side.
22.
Yeah, there's no corridor.
If that was even possible.
Well, there might be a little rock to deal with, but I don't know, and sliding roads and, things like that. So it's believe me, I've driven that road a number of times since we started this, and I've looked at the specific locations where the fiber optic hops out of the ground, is on a pole, and then dies back down. There's obvious and specific reasons for that, and so those are all concerns and issues, and there's a reason that number is that high.
Yeah, and that's just trying to make it clear to everybody that everybody drives that road, that and they know there's a slide area.
Yeah.
So for the pipe to come out of the ground and go back down in is
where the pavement's probably 2 feet thick in one area because they pave over it every time it sloughs. And
Yeah, yeah. And also the, oh, where'd it go? Well, I already asked the question about tank size, but there's people with 500-gallon metal tanks. There's people with 750-gallon tanks. Is a 700, you know, you can't, I don't know if you can answer it, but is a 750-gallon tank okay for either or system?
I wouldn't be able to answer that today. That's a question we'd have to look at in more depth and see. You know, every house is different, like you said.
But they can think for the future, and if they go 1,050, they're probably a lot safer. If
Bigger is always better, right? Is that
that's right.
As they say?
And also we've always talked about 64 million, and now it's 85 million. Just for everybody else to I understand why, but for everybody listening, now they see the big jump, and that's because why? The three-basin rule.
Well, it's not specifically 3-basin rule. I mean, there's the 3-basin rule affects so much of everything that we're looking at there. But the 85, that jump, there's also built into that life cycle analysis, like as I mentioned at the beginning, the cost of the improvements that are going to happen after day one, which you're not going to finance that. You know, that's going to be done by development and people that, you know, expand later. So there's that number will lower as we get to the recommended plan of what that looks like for day one and what those costs are. That will lower from the 85.
Yeah, I just didn't want to scare everybody.
Yeah.
I'm not scared.
And Peter, this is for this is the population estimates for how long?
20 years.
20 years.
Yep.
I know
with the extra industry that we had talked about as well.
And that's what I was concerned about. Thank you. So that is with the augmented population that we anticipate that might be added in Mill City, Gates, potentially Detroit, and maybe Idana. Idana, I don't think had a huge amount of population increase, but just the estimated based on what happened in other cities. So that is calculated in.
Yeah, and the fluff from the industrial users is quite, it's a good amount when you're looking at how small these communities are. So we can do two different things. Continue answering, go to, what I have shown up here right now is just assumptions, items that as Dallin and I were looking at this, you know, one thing I wanted to mention, Danielle, we emailed about this. The North Santiam Canyon jurisdiction is limited to the city limits. And I should have clarified this earlier, but we can make this adjustment obviously now, but the city of Gates, their water system extends outside the city limits across the river. And what I heard is, no, it has to stay with the city limits. I know that was a specific question we had gotten by email through Shelley about what's going to happen with the south side of Gates.
So jurisdiction is city limits, doesn't mean that we can't offer that service. And that would be a question then. I guess there's two questions. Does the state allow for that in an unincorporated area that's inside the UGB? That I don't know. You know, do they allow for urban services? I guess is my concern. And then if the cities are offering that service, that would be potentially a additional service that is outside of the immediate jurisdiction. And we've talked about planning for that, right? So planning for potentially if the Forest Service was interested in connecting down the road and all of that kind of stuff. So maybe we need to dig in a little bit more on that, on what the state's going to allow, because we don't want to eliminate some potential funding if we're having to, maybe fight with LCDC.
Yeah, you can do it. It's a matter of, and I'm not a planner by career path or whatever you want to call. But so that's something we can talk to. We're looking at that for the county in another location, that Brooks Hopmere project. Something that we can talk about is that Title 11, I think is what it's called, and how you can expand. the location outside of, on the south side of Gates is outside of city limits and outside UGB. And they're allowed to do that. And I've seen sewer and water provided outside city limits and UGB, but the exact process, we will need to define that. But if I just need to get direction of, should I be pulling that out of the figures and not including that in the cost estimate for what we're looking at right now?
I'm going to look to the chair to ask that question. Do we want to make sure that that location outside of Gates is included in these calculations?
Yes.
Do we need to ask and kind of talk with everybody here?
I can add a little info.
Please.
Right now, Gates is looking at changing water meters for various reasons. And there's 15 users outside the city limits. So that gives you a number of who's actually outside the city boundaries that are on the city water system. There's 15 accounts. So it's not something huge, but however that goes down the road to make that decision, that probably should be taken into consideration. It's a relatively small number.
So Dale, that's probably accurate. The question is, sometimes are those locations, first of all, can they do it in a different way, right? Like, are they places that potentially could have septic systems themselves, right? I think lot size is going to matter there, location and all that kind of stuff. I think those are real questions we should ask. But we also have to take into consideration from a financial perspective, each additional pipe, each additional thing costs more. And are those customers, what is the value of that customer over the time too? So I think those are questions we'll need to ask. But from the planning perspective, Ken, let's try to figure out so we can give Peter some guidance.
I'm going to be up there tomorrow. I can ask Tracy if she's got a map of those locations so we can at least know distance.
We know where they're at. We have all that information. We need to know whether the sewer authority is going to include them or not in the initial phase of construction and including them. We have all the information, details and information of who they are, where they are, and all those systems. I would assume they have existing septic right now or are rebuilding existing septic, and how that works out. That's,
They're in Lynn County.
Correct.
Yep.
If I recall, when we were drawing our boundaries for the sewer authority, we were kind of taking into consideration cost benefits of, how many people would we be drawing in for the amount of pipe we were going to have to lay, or the cost to take it out to these extended areas. So I don't know if that's something we would have to consider. Like if we're sending it out there a long ways, a big pipe for one or two homes, that might not be worth it. So at this time.
That is the pipe that you're showing, Peter, going right by him?
It's going, what we have currently shown crosses the bridge. It gravities across to the north side of the bridge, and then there's a regional lift station that sends it all the city's flow out to Mill City. But that is an interesting question, Tim, because I did search and do some searching on the distances. If you go along the highway, it's about the same distance, if not maybe a tenth shorter, to get into Mill City. But then you have to cross, the bridge that was just, that has this awesome project that just helped out. You have to cross somewhere, and that concrete bridge, I would prefer to cross there. So you're already crossing there. It's just a matter of, you have a gravity and then a collection going back. You would be, this area would add a gravity line or a step line across the river. So.
Well, I'm not arguing against it. I'm just pointing out that I think that's why we drew our boundaries where we did. If we want to make our sewer authority boundaries big enough to include those areas, or if they're not already, then I'm not opposed to it by any means, as long as we can get the funding.
Well, and the sewer authority doesn't necessarily have to only provide services within the authority. they can offer services outside. So that is not a hurdle that we have to jump over. So Dale, do you know if these areas, were they heavily impacted by the fires? Because that would also, to me, in my mind,
I would assume
Linwood, yeah.
down, that's gonna be down Gates Bridge East past Linwood. I've been down there once. Yeah, there was some fire impact down there.
There's a number of homes that are gone in that
Yeah.
area. I would say about 30%, a third of them, Dale, does that seem appropriate?
They're a little more spread out. Lots are a little bigger in that area.
Okay.
Once you get east a little ways, yeah, maybe 25%. And there's homes you can't see right off of Gates Bridge East, Mad Creek, and that stuff go back up the hill. And I've never been up, so that I couldn't speak to that. But yeah, there was fire damage that far east, several miles.
So Peter, is there additional information that you can provide maybe to help us make that decision here?
Sure, we can break out what the cost is. It might bring up an interesting discussion with Gordon as far as he might be saying, get every connection you can, and the cost benefit there, right? I mean, you want as many people participating to share the cost, and these are right there next to the city. So anyways, and we can.
It depends on the cost of reaching them.
Yeah. So
there's a
we
revenue impact and there's a cost impact.
That's
We
why
can-
I'm wondering if they're in line. I mean, if they in close proximity to where you're gonna run the line. I mean,
Shelley has something.
Well, it brings to question the same thing with Idana, a bridge, and Lynn County. Is the other side of Gates, and Idana, are they in their city limits?
They are.
So when we drew this, we were including the same concept as across the river in the other county.
yes.
Yeah.
And then I remember talking about this years ago. Are we including the area, I think it's called North Railroad Avenue? In
That one?
No.
It's you know where I mean? It's
Road Ave, it's right past the restrooms.
yes.
Yeah, no.
Because I remember we talked about that, because that's like out of the city limits and out of the UGB.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was well outside. I want to say it was like maybe 2+ miles, 2 to 3 miles.
Yeah.
So what we could do is, sorry, go ahead, keep going,
Well,
Shelley.
and no, I mean, and I know that it's actually a bigger discussion, but sort of the door was opened, because then as Danielle touched on, then we want to talk about the potential of someday, we want to leave that door open, absolutely, of the state park and the Forest Service there out of the city limits of Detroit, because they are quite interested and they would bring dollars.
But that discussion, they'd have to get it to the bridge of Detroit.
Oh,
Or
well,
across. Yeah.
yes, I just want to make sure that we are, as we're all saying, we need to keep our options open and plan for now, but hope for later, kind of a thing. But I did have specifically that question about Idana, so thank you.
No, unless Peter's gonna run the drain field over there by the Forest Service.
Hey, I've spotted some land. There's some great land over there.
There's some pretty good land. We talked about that last time. So
And when I talk to my FEMA buddies, I'm always talking about that land. So
If you're gonna pipe it all the way down to Mill City, it goes right past the state park too. They could just put in a lift station there.
right?
But,
just tap in,
So as far as Gates and Railroad Avenue goes, Gates Bridge, if you go out Gates Bridge East, just past the Linwood Drive, the next road off of Gates Bridge East is Greenway Drive. I know because that's where my parents lived for 25 years. And there was, I want to say, 10 houses down there, and probably 6 or 7 of them burned. And that is 1 mile outside the city limits of Gates, going up Gates Bridge East. But it's also directly across from Minto Park and the rest area, which is where Railroad Avenue begins. So
yeah, this gets into a much larger discussion of these things, and I
think that'd be great to have them hook on sometime in the future, but I don't think that should be our focus now.
Yeah,
most of those are larger lots and can tolerate their own.
But what about what he was talking about just across the bridge into Lynn County, and then you're talking about getting down into Mill City?
So we wouldn't be going that far in that direction. But I guess, Danielle, I would propose that we for the time we leave it in. I don't know if is there harm in leaving it in and furthering on, and then the board needs to know that there's a decision to be made. Maybe Gordon might disagree with me on that one, but he wants to know exact numbers maybe. But so I think that's what I would propose is let's leave it in there. Let's move on with that, and then that'll have to be a decision made later by the board.
You need to see a map.
Sure. I don't know that I want to hit on what I've got up here very much as far as these discussion topics. These are really just, these are all just things that we will need to deal, make sure that the power is sufficient to get to where the pump station locations and everything. I mean, these are all design and facilities planning study, topics. Dallin hit on the, needing the acreage. If we're doing additional drain field, it could be quite, a significant amount of drain field. And then the treatment plant certifications for a mechanical plant, it does take a much higher level of certifications, and operators are not plentiful. Heath could talk about that. It's a struggle around in the industry to find appropriately certified operators, and that is a challenge, and that's something that will have to be dealt with. And then the state's requirements for the discharge to the river, we can't get it out of them. And so we've made assumptions. We feel they're pretty reasonable assumptions, but that's just, and you asked about the temperature. That's one of the assumptions, right? I mean, we understand that that's probably a factor there. So I'm
going to throw Penn under the bus for a second. He offered the idea of a snow park. I mean, we could really cool that water.
Yeah.
A snow park.
That's not throwing me under the bus. That's a great idea.
I think it's fabulous.
And that could be right behind the CC camp facility if that's where the facility is going to go. But there's a lot of property back there.
Make it an indoor one, and then I think you're sold. But then again, you need much bigger chillers. Much bigger. Yeah, that Idana Ice is going to be changing their business plan, I think. So,
Tell everybody that they won't buy the ice.
No.
Right. So I would like to move on in the interest of time because Gordon's got important information to present to us. I don't want to avoid questions. But at the same time, I do want to get there, and maybe we circle back later, or we push to the next one. So, Gordon, I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get there for you. I think we are there. Let me get to the next slide.
Fine. Yeah, Ashley, why don't you give me control of the slide presentation, and I'll just.
That's complicated here. Let me. How do I give you control?
Make me a co-host.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me do that from here.
Okay.
That's my limits here, Gordon.
Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
We can see yours. There you go.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna. All righty. This is the second half of the presentation, and it's focused on the Mill City system valuation. The context is that, if we're thinking about building this new regional system, that part of the system, part of the area already has a sewer utility. So the new larger wastewater authority would in effect need to acquire the Mill City system in order to create an integrated regional system. but instead of paying cash up front, the regional system would be taking over the Mill City assets and liabilities and providing an ongoing rate credit for some number of years. How is that to be done? Well, one way to do that is by doing a valuation of these assets. And that's what I've looked at over the last month. So we determined the purchase price, so to speak, of the Mill City system and figure out how to create financial equivalence between the Mill City customers and other regional customers. Now, I'm going to make an important general observation about valuations, business valuations, asset valuations in general, and that it's a judgment about a price that would be acceptable to both parties. It's not a scientific thing that yields a single right answer. More than one method can be used. And it's, conceptually, it's a willing buyer, willing seller, where all parties have all the relevant information and neither is under compulsion. That's the legal definition. But there's a lot of judgment involved in arriving at an answer. I'll give you my recommendation, but just be aware that involves a lot of assumptions, a lot of judgment calls, and it is a reflection of my understanding of the priorities of the parties, and that's important. And the relationship between the parties is important in this case. It's not like one company is buying a steel mill from some other company. In this case, the parties will continue to have a relationship. Mill City is part of the partnership. So we're trying to figure out what price would adequately recognize the city of Mill City's interests in the existing treatment plant and other assets. There are three traditional methods used in business valuation, including utility valuation: cost, market, and income. I'm going to skip over market and income because they really don't help us very much in this situation. The cost approach is what best fits the purpose of this valuation and the facts here. However, within the cost approach, there are a couple of common alternative methods. One is called original cost less depreciation, OCLD, and another is replacement cost new less depreciation. They happen to both be relevant to this situation, but in different ways and to different degrees. We'll talk about that in more detail. But those are a couple of main methods that I'm going to focus on. Original cost less depreciation focuses on the seller and measures the seller's actual investment at the time that the assets were acquired. It's net of grant funding or outside funding. It's net of accumulated depreciation since the date that the asset was placed in service. It does rely on asset records, which might not be readily available. Most cities on a cash basis accounting method, so it doesn't maintain the fixed asset accounting database. So I couldn't just say, okay, what's the net book value of XYZ asset? It involves historical records and a lot of estimates. But it is a type of method that ensures compensation for the prior investment, and therefore in a merged system, it can be used to calculate the credit for prior investment that could be applied to individual ratepayers, which is one of the things that we need to do in this situation. Replacement cost, new less depreciation, RCNLD, it focuses on the buyer. It measures avoided costs that the buyer would have to incur were it not acquiring these assets. And that happens to apply to this situation. You really are building a system, and maybe the treatment plant, but definitely the pipes and the step systems would have to be built in pretty much the same form that they are right now, and the pump stations. So there is an avoided cost, but replacement cost is more theoretical than actual cost. It depends on some rough estimates, unit cost estimates. And it also, it's theoretical because it applies depreciation to assets that weren't actually acquired. But once again, we net out the grant funding, We net out accumulated depreciation since when the asset was acquired. This relies on inventory records and current unit cost estimates. For example, I gave the example of 2,790 lineal feet of 6-inch PVC pipe multiplied by $213 per lineal feet. And that can give me a number. And I can do that with all the other assets. So I go to Peter and say, how much would this cost? How much would that cost? And he uses his best judgment on that. And it's not an actual cost. It's not as solid as the historical original cost figures, but it is reasonable to the degree that we're trying to measure avoided costs, which are of value to the buyer. You can also create hybrid methods. You can blend the OCLD and the RCNLD values. And that might be appropriate in this case because there really has been prior investment from those city customers and there really are avoided costs to the regional system. But of course that leaves a question, how do we blend the methods? And I'll make a suggestion about that. First of all, a comment about the data sources and the estimating methods. For replacement cost, I use the engineer's estimate for current unit cost multiplied by the number of units. So I did that for pipe, I did it for step systems, I did it for cleanouts and manholes, I did it for treatment plant, pump stations, all those fixed assets. Later on, I'll get to the question about cash and equipment and vehicles, things like that. That's at a different stage. But at this stage, I was focused on those big stationary fixed assets. For the original cost, for anything that was built in 1992, when the original system was built, we used the actual cost for the total project. And then I allocated the components by their percentage share of replacement cost. I didn't have numbers for the cost of the step systems or the cost of the 4-inch pipe or the cost of the treatment plant by itself. But I did have a total cost for the whole thing. I know the whole thing cost $6.8 million at the time. And so I then allocated it to the various types of assets that were built at the time. For the pipe and step systems built since 1992, we created an average installation year, just assuming a straight line growth pattern, just for the sake of simplicity, and then adjusted the replacement cost by using an inflation index, which in this case is the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. And that ENR, the CCI, is a common inflation metric for anything having to do with fixed assets or construction costs. And it's widely available. I had historical data for that. Peter gave me an estimate about how much pipe, about a half mile of pipe and about 60 homes, I think, as I recall, 60 step systems that were built since the original big project. And all the numbers I'm giving you here are changeable if new data arrives. If somebody has better information and wants to correct it, it's easy to correct. For the 2008-2009 projects, another big wave of investment that Mill City went through. For that one, I had better historical cost data from the city budget documents. And it was already mostly divided between the treatment plant and the pump stations. For grants, I had actual data on the actual funding packages. So I know how much of that 1992 system was paid for by grants and how much of the 2008-9 improvements were paid for by grants. So those were based on actuals. And then I applied the percentages equally to all the things that were applicable to a given funding package. Now, what's my recommended method? Here's what I'm suggesting. I do recommend the hybrid. My starting point is usually, in a situation like this, is usually original cost. And that's the most basic and most real kind of thing. It actually happened. It's not an estimate. It's not hypothetical or theoretical. And in this case, since we're trying to arrive at a credit for prior investment, I don't want to stray too far from the actual prior investment, what people actually paid. But at the same time, I don't completely want to ignore the avoided cost. I think it's important to acknowledge the value of avoided costs to an otherwise new regional system. The data source, as I mentioned, is stronger for the original cost, but it's again, I want to have some influence from the replacement cost analysis. So I'm suggesting that we blend it so that the original cost is weighted 75% and the replacement cost is weighted 25%. You can see by those round numbers that it's not a scientific thing. I'm making a general assumption, but that's one that feels reasonable to me based on our purposes, which are to create a credit for prior investment, and based on how solid the data is, whether it's actual experience or whether it's an estimate. What does that lead us to? Well, I'm gonna focus for the sake of explaining this this chart. I'm going to focus on the third column, which is the one I'm recommending, the hybrid method. If we look at the costs and for instance, for sewer mains, that's $6,859,000 is a quarter of the way from original to avoided. You can see there's some original to replacement cost. You see there's some big differences in these numbers. But 25% of the way to is $6,859,000. If you do the same kind of calculation for the cleanouts and step systems and manholes, you're going to end up with 2.7 million. Same thing for the wastewater treatment plant, about 3.3 million, and the pump stations, about 1.3 million. The total cost for all those assets is about 14.2 million. Using that kind of decision criteria, the 25% of the way from original to replacement, based on those two other columns. Part of that was grant funded, and about 8 million was paid for with grants. The original project was about 2/3 paid with grants, and the 2008-9 improvements were not quite as much paid for by grants, but they also had substantial grants. So the net investment was about 6.1 million. That happened a long time ago. Some of that value has eroded over the passage of time. And so we deduct the accumulated depreciation. That's the 2.5 million negative number that you see there. So the net investment less depreciation is 3.6 million. And then I round it off. And by the way, rounding is important when you're talking about valuations, because it's an indication that we're not being too precise. It's the judgment. But in this situation, I'm recommending a value of about 3.6 million, which is about $900,000 more than the original cost that was invested by the ratepayers. Now, what do we do with this number? In the next few slides, and then I'll be done. But the next few slides try to address this question. Creating a new utility is more than just buying assets. There's debt and other contractual obligations. There's cash reserves, equipment and vehicles, staffing, building system development policies, O&M budget, administrative support. All this stuff has to be thought through. Most of that I'll be addressing, at least in a preliminary way, in the business case evaluation, which is the next step in my analysis, which hopefully could be next month or the month after. But that's the next step in my contribution to this discussion. But for now, I do want to focus on the economic impact that the asset valuation can have on Mill City customers. I'm assuming that the long-term goal is a regional wastewater utility with direct customer billing at geographically uniform rates. That's an assumption, but I do recommend it. In my experience with similar situations, I think that's the wisest approach for you. And if you end up deciding something else, that would make a difference here. But what we're trying to do here is create financial equivalence between the Mill City customers and everyone else. We can use the asset value to develop a rate credit. And that way Mill City customers will pay the same rates as everyone else, except for a limited term credit to reflect the value of their existing system. And when that, it's like paying off a loan. Once you pay off that loan, then they pay the same rates as everyone else in future years. That's kind of the concept I'm working with. Here's how I calculated it. Again, I'll focus on the third column. I forgot to, oh darn, I forgot to give you the 3.6 million. That's the starting point. I should have kept that top row. It's 3.6 million. There's about 2.1 million of outstanding debt. In addition to the fixed assets, there's a cash reserves, and I'm just using a 3-year average from two of the funds, the two sewer funds, 310,000. And I just used a placeholder number for vehicles and other equipment. When you get actually to the point where you're going to, do the deal, make the transfer of the assets and everything, that's when you want to value the vehicles, the equipment, and the cash. So for now, I'm just making assumptions here. But we end up with a total asset value net of debt about 1.7 million. Now, when I say net of debt, what that means is that the new system, regional system, would be taking over responsibility for the Mill City debt. That's a benefit to Mill City customers. Of course, they'd be paying for a share of the new regional system debt too. But that's part of the transaction here. I calculated about 839 EDUs and using 2020 customer data. And so the total asset value net of debt per EDU is about $2,000 per household per EDU. Conveniently and coincidentally, Mill City has 15 years left on its debt. It's paying 1% to the state agency. And so I assume 15 years and 1%, and that comes out to a monthly rate credit of $12.76 per EDU. When you add in the value of the taking over the debt payments, the total benefit's about $28 per EDU. But like I said, the new sewer authority will have its own debt that the rates will have to cover. So the big number I would focus on is the 1276. In other words, people in Mill City would get a bill and it would have the same rates as everyone else, but then it would have this minus 1276 number to offset that cost for a 15-year period. So that's what I'm suggesting as a method, as a way to how you can take the valuation number and convert it into financial equivalence between Mill City and everyone else. And like I said, there are a lot of other types of things to consider in creating a new system that is partly already exists. But at least to be able to create rate equivalence is a step forward. Even with all the limitations of the data and the assumptions and the judgment calls made in valuation. And it is, like I said, it's a preliminary valuation. It should be updated at the time that you actually do the deal. But this gives you a framework of accomplishing that. Any questions? Any questions about either this part or about this part?
Well, I find it all very interesting, obviously, and wanting to know what the benefits are to Mill City, obviously, or, you know, to the sewer authority as a whole. But one question for me, so this EDU credits, so that would just be taking a certain amount off of the bills for individual customers?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
Because
And-
my concern with that is, so there's been some people paying into this for 25 years, but then there's a lot of people that have only been paying into it for 1 or 2 years. And then as we move forward within the next 15 years, there'll also be a lot of people that hadn't paid into it at all.
That's right.
So is there a way that that it could be paid out to the city as far as a payback or something? I don't know, a bill back. I don't know how we do it, work it so that I would say that the city can reinvest the money elsewhere rather than just giving credit on the sewer bills. Because
Yes, contractually that can be done. So we can say, all right, let me, okay, if what was that? What do you remember?
That's what we discussed in the beginning.
3.6 million. Okay, 3.6 million. We could say, we could convert the asset value, 1.781 million into a monthly amount without dividing it by the number of owners. So let's do that. Let me just do that pretty quickly here.
Excuse me, I just thought in the beginning, we had talked about buying their assets in the beginning on a lump sum. That's what am I wrong, Tim? Is that what?
I was thinking there was a reason we couldn't do that. I was thinking that we could assume the debt, but we couldn't pay a lump sum out for it of cash of some sort. I don't remember how it went, because boy, we've been doing this for so many years.
Yeah, I know. We got so much going on. Can't even remember where we were. We'll have to go back. We'll have to review it again.
And of course, it's just me, obviously, and there's going to be there would be other.
No, it was a part of the. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking I would love to see us be able to reinvest that money into our water system or other infrastructure items that the city could obviously use as well, rather than, obviously we want to keep our rates the same, and we would want something. It'd be nice to be able to pay back some sort of amount to people that have been on the system for 25 years and as opposed to somebody that's only been on it for 3 years, obviously. But to be fair enough, I mean, we pay that sewer fee. We weren't paying it as an investment. We were paying it to dispose of our sewer and septic. So I think the city would use the money wisely to reinvest in other infrastructure needs. Is just my thought.
Right, and I just did a little bit of quick.
Sure. No, I appreciate what you've done here. It looks
about 128,000.
Yeah.
Sorry, say that one more time, Gordon.
About 128,000 per year, if I did that math correctly.
Sorry, you'll have to say it a little bit louder.
100.
You're kind of muffled a little. Your audio kind of got muffled a little through the presentation. So, but you're saying that so that payout each year, instead of having a rate reduction, it would be a payout to Mill City yearly for 15 years. Is there a lump sum payout that can be made? I think that's probably more what I assume you can. That would be the 1.78 million, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
yeah, and all of these are policy judgments that you guys get to make.
Yeah.
That's the form of the compensation. I was assuming that it would be preferable to be made level over the period of the remaining debt.
I think,
but it wouldn't have to be that way.
I think the cleanest way is just buy it out and let Mill City. Okay. My opinion. That's just mine. I'm only one vote.
That way I could spend it all in my tenure and not let.
So Gordon, I appreciate you actually going through this because it actually gave ideas that we hadn't even thought of yet,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
for us, this actually gives us something that we can go to, not necessarily our lenders, but potentially for grants to offset that cost on our behalf. So using grants to help pay off or actually buy an asset, there are monies available for us to do that. So that to me, I'm hearing everything that's being said here. You've given us a lot of really great information and it's super detailed. So I think I feel much more comfortable now than I did before. We're right about where we thought we were going to be. So that's a nice, refreshing piece.
Yeah, it's nice to
that's-
know this big time.
Yeah. But I do think that there might be, for us, a simpler model, because the last thing we want to do is pit anybody against each other either by having a credit on somebody's and not the others. And that was, I think, was pretty consistent with the conversation that was around the table, that, you know, we wanted all of the cities to have the same rate because we wanted the cities to be able to benefit from the fact that IDANA is low income and brings their cost down. And Mill City's been paying a certain amount. So we're trying desperately to keep it stable as possible.
Good information.
So we can say this could result in either a $12.76 per month rate credit or $128,000 a year payment to the city, or a $1.71 million payment to the city up front. But that 1.71 is, part of that is the cash on hand, reserve balances. So the money would trade places. So real. So and that $20,000 estimate, I didn't even try to make that real. Like I said, that was a placeholder. But
that'd be a
I started to think. Let me just brainstorm a little bit farther in advance to the next stage of my thinking. How would you actually do this? And I think you have an advantage of creating this large, new sewer system where there is one, but not more than one, existing provider. So you already have someone who is sending out bills, has a billing software, or knows how to run a utility, has pipes, has employees. And you could treat this organizationally as kind of like an expansion of the Mill City existing organizational infrastructure. Of course, there'd be different governance. There's already different governance, but it's really valuable to already have a starting point for all of those things, development policies and all those things that constitute a utility. So when I was adding in the vehicles and other equipment and the cash balances, that's when I was starting to brainstorm about the actual merger or kind of expansion of the creation of one larger entity to take the place of one smaller entity that already exists. But the larger entity would have a larger service area. And so anyway, that's where I was heading with that 20,000 and the 310,000. When you get close to actually doing a deal, you've got to work through all that stuff.
Thank you, Gordon. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Peter, this is the last slide, so I don't even need to hand the.
Yep, and it's really not nothing special. I mean, this is just next steps. We're looking at doing the TRC. We're doing the TRC meeting Tuesday, and then
review committee.
Yeah, technical review committee, and then continue to draft the master plan, and then. Actually, I adjusted this slide on you, Gordon, since last one. There's TRC number 5, and then there's a town hall meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It didn't adjust drastically here. So, So from here, I mean, we can turn the time back to you, Ken, and the board if we want to talk about more questions. I mean, the time is for you guys. So whatever's the most benefit.
Well, that's a lot of information. That was good, really good. Thank you. I don't have any more questions. I know our time is limited and we're gonna have to table a whole bunch. So does anybody else have any questions? Oh, there was one from Jeff Smith. If something about not using the existing tanks if they're deteriorated, you'd have to replace them. That's correct. Is that the question, Jeff? Are you on there still?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, so they would be replaced, is my understanding, if they don't meet.
Yeah. We've made assumptions about the number of tanks that would have to be replaced or not, and in the cost estimate, and so we obviously haven't looked at them, but you know, we've had to make some kind of assumption of how many existing tanks would need to be replaced and how many would not. So
okay.
And who's footing the cost for that? Is that the homeowner?
we actually have that cost in the cost estimate. That's a decision not for us. That's a decision for the sewer authority and funding mechanisms and how all that works out. So that's okay. It's a good comment, good question, and obviously a concern, right? But that's something in the cost estimate. We just had to make an assumption on a certain amount.
Janet has her hand up.
Just a quick question. I know that several of us have made promises to our councils that we would have some type of a draft report this month. Do we know if that's still going to happen? We're going to hear about it if we don't, right, Tim?
Well, just what we just saw here, I don't know if any of that is going to be available to us to show. I don't want to put it out to the public, obviously, yet. But you know, it would be nice to be able to give some sort of a preliminary report as to where we're at.
We do have some draft sections, and that's gonna as we walk away from this and the TRC, the Technical Review Committee meeting next week, that's going to start to take a lot more shape, and we're going to have draft sections. We do have a few sections already, and whatever we have in draft and what we provided previously, this presentation, I'm more than happy to provide that. And I would talk to Danielle and McRae and kind of let them, you know, guide, maybe offer some advice there. But there's no reason why I can't share it. So.
Tim,
okay.
are you looking specifically?
Yeah, well, right now we're digging up the backyard looking for money right now to do some little upgrades to the system because our capacity is to a point where, you know, we need to do something soon because we're what, 95% capacity is what the report told us. We've got a couple of new homes coming online now, as well as a 16 unit subdivision that's going to be built, as well as Marion County is looking to potentially put in 55 to 80 units inside the city limits or within our urban growth boundaries. So there's potential in the next couple of years. So we're going to have to do something for our capacity right now. So
As you know, I'm well aware of those, you know, concerns and issues, and those will be able to be addressed and how they fit with the long-term perspective in the next, you know, month or so. We're going to be able to, you know, provide some better input on that. So
I know that also the folks that have lots in Detroit and stuff like that, even in Gates, are looking to know what their expectations are, you know, what they're going to be needing to do to be able to hook up to a sewer, if it's going to be happening in 3 years or whatever, but they want to be able to make the right move now towards that direction, and so that we're able to accommodate that, so they just don't throw money down a rat hole.
That won't happen. We won't let that happen.
The problem is we can't make that promise until we can actually get those
Right.
details,
So
right?
that's
And-
that's why we're putting a fire underneath your chair there, Peter, and
Yes.
No, I feel it.
hot seat.
I feel it.
Tim,
All right.
and I'm gonna tag in McCrae for a second. Tim, so we did have a conversation with Dave Kinney as well, and Stacy, and I believe you were on the phone call as well. But just so everybody else knows, because it was a very long month with lots of things happened, that Mill City has very specific immediate needs. We have some space in our current contract to do the additional work, and so McCrae is helping us with figuring all of that out. So we're going to find a way to help that process along from the county's perspective. And I've got some money in for next year's budget request to the county to help that along as well.
All right.
And I'm sorry, Ken, there is one more piece that I forgot to mention earlier. We did put in a request for the legislature. And previously I had talked about the fact that the county had put in a request for the legislature. We had done it for 25, we had done it for 20, bumped it to 25. Now we have a request at the legislature for 50 million. I don't know where that's going to go. It's going to be, if they can actually get through a session and vote, we'll be in better shape. But just so you know, we're looking at $40 million, and that was based on some of the estimates that we came together with Peter and also with Dave. $40 million to do the Gates Mill City piece in that phase first, and then 10 million to help with immediate temporary needs in Detroit until we can get those set up as well. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. 10 million for, it's a mix of engineering that we're going to have to do based around all of these other septic tanks, and potential grants, either grants or the sewer authority putting together funding for getting people's septics up to speed.
Janet, just for the record, I was going to table E, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, and Danielle want to do legislative updates.
Oh, let me finish the alphabet, Danielle. I want to see how far you can get.
Hey.
I'm going to be nervous when I run out of letters. I don't know what happens next. Like, am I supposed to put like 1Z? I'm so confused.
But the money that you were talking about was 40 million to do Gates and Mill City, and then it was 10 million for up in Detroit and Idana, but 1 million was going to go for master plan, and 9 million was going to go possibly, if it all works, and 9 million was going to help with the septic systems in Detroit as per se.
It has everything to do with if the legislature can agree to this. And then because it happens over this next biennium, it would be funded within hopefully that 2-year period.
Do you need any information for your next meeting, Tim? Or, I mean, I can text you the pictures I took.
I don't know that we will. We just need to be able to report so that, the council knows we're moving in the right direction with the upgrades and stuff that we are looking to potentially do. So it's not like they're going to happen overnight either, but we need to make nice incremental steps towards that.
If we could get a presentation, that would be awesome.
Do a what?
If we could get Peter and Gordon's presentation, that would be awesome.
Oh, okay. You get that, Peter?
I mean, a copy of it?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Sure. Actually, I'm going to make a small change to add those 2 other ways of forms of compensation. The upfront lump sum and the payment to the city as opposed to the customers. So then I'll send it.
Give us till after the TRC meeting on Tuesday, Janet, and then I think that would be better. So if we make any small modifications and edits before then, we can pass that around if that works. So.
When is your meeting?
The second Tuesday. So we're
Okay.
good.
That gives you time. Okay.
Give you a couple of weeks, yeah.
Awesome.
I'd be curious to see it after the TRC meeting, but also on Gordon's end, I know that, well, I know people and I know that they're all going to look at direct replacement costs. They're going to see that great big number rather than the actual cost that we put. So it's nice that you threw in the hybrid portion of it. Like I said, there'll be plenty of people that'll stand up and want the direct replacement cost, but I think what you came up with was a very fair analysis, and I appreciate your work that you've done on it.
Both of you, Gordon, Peter, Dallin, we're not leaving you out.
Thank you.
You know, those Aggies.
There has been talk, and I know this is on the new business, but there was talk about meeting maybe twice a month or doing a video. You know, it's going to be moving fast forward next 3 or 4 months instead of once a month. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Here's let me throw this out there. I just know information's moving fast. I know that commissioners for Marion County are getting information sometimes before you guys are because we're not meeting as much. So then the question is how, you know, I offered to like, do we need to do YouTube videos just every week of what's changed and what's going on and moving forward? Do we need to do a quick email update every week? Do we need to meet every other week, at least for the next 3 or 4 months? So I would like to, you know, at least look at that as an option for everybody, because I don't want any of you guys to not have information in a timely fashion. So I'm hoping for feedback.
My 2 concerns is number 1, obviously that we're not meeting just to meet. I know that there's stuff to share obviously every time, but you know, meetings and then when we struggle for things to talk about or we're talking about the same thing over and over again. But my other concern would be, and this was probably the bigger concern, is it going to be a lot of a lot more work to put on an extra meeting? So more agendas, more putting stuff together, more, you know, more PowerPoints, that kind of stuff. Those all take time from staff, and they can be, I mean, as long as if we can keep one of them a work session or something that's a little simpler, whatever, I don't know. I'm willing to do what it takes and stuff, as long as you don't mind me being late. These meetings start during my commute time typically, so I try and rush home, but that Zoom just doesn't work very well going down the highway. I need to perfect that.
Well, if we did a YouTube video, then we can post it on Mill City's Facebook, Gates, Idana, Detroit's. There's 3 of them up in Detroit.
What do you mean by doing a Zoom? Or excuse me.
YouTube
video.
That'd be Danielle. That'd be Danielle.
Yeah. I find that it's really easy for me to do a couple of minute YouTube, upload it, and then just put a thumbnail on it. So like after this meeting this evening, so in about 10 minutes, I will go download this. I will upload it to the YouTube, and it'll take probably about 40 minutes because it takes a while to download. So by tomorrow morning, this will be uploaded on YouTube so people can view the meeting. So,
but what you're saying is sometime during a week, you can do one, and then Shelley could post it all over the place.
Yeah.
And everybody would have it. And I think that, you know, I know Tim has a hard time driving from Brooks to
Mill City.
You know,
And it maybe we just need to do a couple of work sessions in the meantime. And the reason is because Joel's work on all of the policy and procedures and all that stuff, it's fabulous work. We really need to kind of actually work through it and
Yeah.
answer some of the questions that have come up from it. I've got a bunch of markings all over it, just based on what we've talked through over the couple of years. And I just want to make sure that we're being consistent so then we can get those policies and procedures uploaded so we can then start hiring people. I think there's some things that we have to do on the work session side for the next couple of months only. I'm hoping it's only for a few months. So that's the other thing. And then in July, typically we haven't had a meeting.
We're gonna
And
have
so
to
we've
have
got to
one.
make a decision because that first, typically it's that July 4th week that we have our meeting. So really need some feedback from you.
The
Maybe
4th of
now
July
on.
is on a weekend this year, so the Thursday shouldn't matter so much. But just like the sewer itself is important infrastructure, these administrative details for the authority are important infrastructure for us too. So we need to pay attention to them.
Couple thoughts that I have is the really good news is I have a new friend who is super, super educated on Wix, which is the design for our website for those who don't know that and don't need to know that. But I'm going to be able to figure out how to get the YouTube videos onto the website. I spent a while today, could not figure it out. And I also want to be able to figure out how to do a blog or a posting. So I'm working on that. Detroit runs into the same thing about having 2 meetings a month. Now we have so much to talk about that what happens is the bottom of the agenda drops out and then we're trying to catch up to the next 2 weeks and then something drops out if we don't do it every 2 weeks. And I think it would behoove us to do something more often so that we don't keep dropping the important stuff or the stuff that didn't seem extremely crucial tonight. So I am actually, I can't believe this, but I'm actually a fan of meeting more often just to keep us caught up. And I got to tell you, Joel, the city of Detroit needs policies and procedures. It turns out we don't actually have any written. And I read yours today and almost cried because they're so good for the city of Detroit. And we have needed them so badly. I'm like, I'm just changing all this NSSAs to city of Detroit and I'm submitting it, like done. So thank you so much for everybody's work.
Great. Yes, we'll appreciate it.
Yeah.
Did you write the bylaw? Did you do that bylaw one or?
I think those were just my notes.
Okay, all right.
Joel, were those my?
I'm gonna start deleting stuff on my in my files.
I think Ken was trying to correct my Danielle notes. And if you've ever seen my notes, it's not good. It's very chaotic. So
I did that the last minute. All right, everyone, anything else?
So am I rescheduling? And that's what I need the feedback on. Am I scheduling another, like a work session or something specifically? Let's do it one at a time. Can we schedule a work session for the policies and procedures?
Yes.
Then we can approve, so we can approve them at the next meeting.
We've been putting that off. We can't do that anymore. We have to do something.
Yes, let's do that. Yes.
A week or 2?
2.
2 weeks? Anybody else? Everybody agree to 2 weeks and then do a work session?
So what are we looking at? The 15th?
And we could do it a little later than 6. Since most of us aren't actually commuting, I'm walking 15 feet to my office and taking into account Tim, who is actually physically commuting. Maybe we could just move it to 6:30. Does that work?
What works for you, Tim?
It helps out. Thursday's my freight day at work, so it's tough to get out of there before 5:30 for me, and it's a 40-minute commute. So,
do we think it would still take 2 hours, or would it be a little less, or
less?
Way less.
About an hour. About an hour.
By 8, no matter what.
6:30 to 7:30. Does that sound about right?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. And I'll send it out specifically on the topic of the policies and procedures.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I got all I needed. Thank you, sir.
Not a problem. Thank you, everybody tonight. This is good. All right. You want to make a motion or just say?
Good night, everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine.
I make a
Right.
motion that we adjourn this meeting at 8:10 PM on
Hey, that's
on
my
April
job.
1st.
I got 8:03.
I have
Anyone-
8:03 too. I agree. 8:03.
And you want a second?
Yep, I do.
All right, we're out of here.
You.
All
Have
in
a good
favor,
one.
say aye.
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 And we don't have to. We don't have to, Shelley. It's in our deal.
And you can wish my husband a happy 73rd birthday today.
Happy
Wow.
73rd birthday.
So
Happy birthday.
I need to go. Love you all. Bye.
See
All right,
ya.
bye.